Welcome to the Disney Parks Podcast, your Disney infotainment podcast. Keep your hands, arms, feet, and legs inside the podcast at all times and get ready for the Disney Parks Podcast.
All right. Hey, we have a fascinating, interesting guest for you today. Today's guest is a creative force behind some of Disney's most iconic experiences worldwide. He worked on the Disney Cruise Line, including the Disney Wish, where storytelling is woven into every deck, giving you that full-on experience. He helped reimagine Walt Disney Studios Park in Paris, which helped bring the Avengers campus there. He spans the globe, working from Hong Kong to Shanghai, blending the different cultures into the Disney magic. And he also helped transform Downtown Disney into what we're now calling Disney Springs, and parks and hotels and so much more. So welcome to the show, Theron.
Nice to be here. Thanks so much, Tony.
You've done let me ask the first question. So how did your journey with Disney begin? How did you did you wake up one day and go, I want to go work for that Disney company over there? They look interesting.
Well, much to the chagrin of thousands of people who are probably have their resumes on file and are maybe waiting for an interview, I quite by accident stumbled into the role of Imagineering. I know that's sorry. It just reinforces that there's just many different ways to enter the industry in general, but specifically Disney. So I was working in film. Is where I got my start, building sets, sculpting, scenic painting, and that moved into set design. And I was doing kind of moving out of the craft and trade work and moving into design. And a job opportunity came up at Universal Studios. Oh. So went there and managed the project of all the artificial rockwork around that central lagoon at the base park, the studio park. Mm-hmm. And there I met a really cool guy by the name of Jolt Hormet. Many of your listeners may know Jolt. He's a kind of a rockwork phenom where he's responsible for so many different artificial rockwork, or I should say plaster and carving. I mean, Tree of Life, the caldera.
His name has been mentioned on the show before.
Yeah, really well-known guy, super guy. Anyways, we worked we kind of both got our start at Disney, at Universal Studios before Disney. Right. And he had moved over to Paris when it was still Euro Disneyland, and gave me a call and said, hey, I need help over here. So I went over, that was in 91. And my responsibility was all the rock work inside and outside of Pirates of the Caribbean at the time. So that was my first role with Imagineering.
Right. So when you left Disney, what was your title then? And then what was your title when you started? And then what was your title? Because I know they have all different, like creative portfolio director, creative executive. So how did the little career progression go?
Well, I'm happy to explain that. But what's really interesting is that after 23 years, that title and leveling and everything within the organization itself changed. But so I started as a field art director in Paris. And my last role when I was there was as a vice president, and I was what they call a portfolio executive. So I basically oversaw, I was the Imagineering liaison to an entire business within the company. Okay. So my role was leading the team for the Disney Cruise Line, which was all three of the new ships, the new island, not only master planning it with Joe Rohde, but sourcing it, finding it, and then all the dry docks on the existing fleet, which they had one a year. So it was a huge portfolio, a lot of work, but amazing fun, going from theme park design to ship design, totally different mindset.
Yeah, I'd ask, when you're thinking about a cruise ship, those people are, I'm not going to say stuck. They ask to be on a ship for 3 days or 5 days or 7 days. And how do you, kind of unfold the story to them over their, 3 or 5, 7 days on on their cruise ship compared to a theme park where they just, they're wandering around wherever they're going.
Right. Well, for Disney, the cruise line guest really, they're kind of pretty well known as the highest affinity guest for the Disney brand, right? They really love the brand. That's kind of the well-known fact about that particular demographic, that guest. If you do a quick side-by-side comparison of a theme park, how it's designed, and how people use it, and you compare that with a ship, you'll immediately begin to see some differences, right? Theme park is mostly outdoors. It's big, it's open space. You don't really have a ceiling. You can kind of build the buildings as tall as you want. You can make it space between attractions as far as you need it to be. Right. Like if you think of Expedition Everest at Disney's Animal Kingdom in Walt Disney World, when you first see Mount Everest, you see that from 1,000 yards, 2,000 yards. You don't have that kind of space allocation on a ship. Yeah. In addition, in a theme park, you don't have guests, at least the last that I heard, staying in Space Mountain for 7 days, right? So an attraction, a park, doesn't get the same level of scrutiny that the ship will. When you're in a park, you're progressively moving through. You go through a land, you absorb the story, you engage with the characters, you see a parade, you engage with live entertainment, with attractions, and the environment, the spatial design. On a ship, you are circulating on that ship day after day, exploring and seeing many different things. Right. But the way that story is laid out and told is very, very different. In a theme park, for example, you don't have vertical circulation. Really, Tower of Terror, and it's a vertical and that kind of thing, but it's not the same. On a ship, what's on deck 2 and what's on deck 3, those two things interact with each other vertically, as well as interaction horizontally along the deck. It's like 3D chess. If there's any nerds out there that know my reference from Star Trek, it's very much thinking of that experience in multi-dimensions, not just in a plane like you would see in a theme park.
Yeah. I've been on several cruises, and there's always hidden things and things you stumble across. Are there any things on the Wish that people might not come across quickly? Like they might have to do a little digging to find? Any little fun secrets?
I would say that there always are those kind of fun secrets. One of the things on the on Disney Cruise Line is, at least while I was there as a leader, we didn't do hidden Mickeys. Part of the reason is because, it's my own opinion, that they distract from the show or the story that you're telling in a particular venue. Right. So on the cruise line, we really like to create layers and layers of detail, so that the longer that you're in the space, you might find a layer of detail that you'd never seen before. So maybe a good example would be the Wonder, the Disney Wonder. That was a huge dry dock that we did while I was there. And we really infused a lot of details from The Little Mermaid, because Ariel is, the main character in the atrium, and her story kind of unfolds there. So that was one element where we added lots of little details in the mural behind the guest relations counter. And another thing that we were playing with was Art Nouveau design, for example, on Disney Wonder. Disney Magic is Art Deco. So we try to infuse shell forms and wave forms and sea life and those types of things all throughout the design. And that's kind of what I would consider really fun things to find, because it furthers and deepens the story.
Yeah. So when you're say running that project, how do you wrangle all the cats that are involved, right? You have electrical, plumbing, engineering, design, carpeting, how do you say, hey, this is our focus, we have to work around, these certain structures or, Coast Guard regulations. How do you wrangle all of that to get a ship out of dock?
It's super complex, as you could imagine. Understatement of the year, right?
Right.
And I would say that having worked in parks, what they call in berm, out of
Mhm.
berm, like
Mhm.
urban design, for
Mhm.
example, like Disney Springs, or nautical design from the ship aspect, they're incredibly complex, right? They're hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And so what that does is it adds a tremendous amount of pressure, and
Yeah.
it adds a lot of layers to what you do.
Right.
So I'm sure that all of your listeners have heard the phrase that it all starts with story. And that's
Right.
really, really important within Disney, within the industry in general. I would say story is critical, but
Yeah.
especially at Disney, everything starts with the story. And it's not just the thing that you paint on or that gets added on to a scene. It is the guiding principles that guide every single member of the team, all the way through design, construction or fabrication,
Hmm.
and into the full life cycle of that particular asset or venue that you're building. The operator uses those stories all the way through. So story is the very first thing that you would do at Imagineering.
Yeah.
You would do that in my design practice as well.
Right.
And it is the component that solves the business problem. It is the component that gives the look, the feel for the space, the venue that you're designing. And it's the core element that invites the visitor, the guest, the player, depending on what you're designing, to participate. It's that
Okay.
open door. It's that emotional connection that gives the guest the ability to feel welcomed and invited into that story. That's the first thing. Everything else
Yeah.
gets wrangled beyond that.
Right.
One point I'll make quickly is, when you're doing a project, say in Florida, like Disney Springs, the builder, all the architects, the engineers, suppliers, most everybody is local, if not regional. So they're in the area. They're either in the Central Florida area, or they're regional. They're in the state, or
Yeah.
the southeastern U.S. So that's, there's a level of complexity there. When you graduate up to doing something with the cruise lines, for example, your construction site, what is actually being built, that's in Papenburg, Germany, northern
Right.
Germany. We had multiple design firms in Sweden, the UK, Norway, the US. We had
Wow.
them basically all over. So you're constantly coordinating between what amounts to 100, 200, 300 people
Wow.
in a global network. That adds an immense amount of complexity.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't even imagine. And I can't imagine the delays. Hey, we can't get that right now. It's going to be another month. The complexity behind that must be
Well,
catastrophic.
imagine this, Tony. Something like, just think of the ships. If you think about
Yeah.
the TVs in
Yeah.
every stateroom, just one example. To get to the Wish being built was, I think, almost 7 years. I think it was 6-something years. So if you specify those TVs in the design phase, they will probably be not even manufactured anymore when the ship is rolling out of the yard, which means there's not parts, they're already out of warranty. So something like technology has to be specified as like the last moment of the last possible day,
Yeah.
of the last second that you can specify it. For that reason, because you
Yeah.
don't want guests to get on the ship and then be like, wow, I had that television, 3 or 4 years ago.
Why
It's
are they
crazy
using
to
two
think that, isn't
televisions
it?
on a cruise ship?
Totally.
Wow, that's crazy. So, kind of switching to Disney Springs, I remember it as the Village Marketplace, the one little area.
1970s.
Yeah, 70s, early 80s, even maybe. And then the transformation to Pleasure Island. We had Pleasure Island and the marketplace. So
Yep.
Disney finally said, "All right, we're out of the Pleasure Island business. We don't want to be a nightclub anymore. We want to be a daytime entertainment and shopping district." So how do you come and say, "All right, let's have a story for this"? I mean, how do you build a story into shopping? A shopping entertainment district like that?
The challenge was actually even bigger than that, because as you recall, there was also the West Side.
Right.
So you had three different decades. You had the
Yeah.
70s, the 80s, and the 90s, which is the Disney Village Marketplace,
Mm-hmm.
Pleasure Island in the 80s, and then the 90s was the West Side.
Right.
So these three properties, these three venues were designed really as independent projects. So they weren't connected from a story perspective.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever remember walking from the Disney Village to the West Side, for example, to see a movie,
Yeah.
you had to go through the parking lot. I mean, it was it was not Disney's. Yeah, it's not Disney's finest hour. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So one thing that other people don't realize that were taking place in the 2000s was that there were busloads of tourists who were staying on Disney property. Buses were coming in and picking them up, taking them off property to places like Florida Mall and the Millennial Mall, and they were spending collectively millions of dollars and hours and hours and hours off-site. Well, any of your listeners knows that the secret sauce in the Walt Disney World success as a commercial entity is to keep people on property, is to keep everything there. Well, the problem at the time was you couldn't buy things like blue jeans and a cool pair of tennis shoes. It was mostly logo product and souvenirs. And just from a shopping perspective, that just wasn't fitting the bill anymore for guests. The food choices were not good to maybe medium at best.
Yeah.
So as a mixed-use district, RD&E, retail, dining, and entertainment, it was no longer on par with any district like that in the United States, much less the world. Right. So the company, under Tom Stagg's leadership, Bob Iger, of course, but then Tom Staggs was in that chairman role for the parks. They said, look, let's spend the money and do it right. Don't just fix Pleasure Island, because as you said, Pleasure Island was closed at that moment. Yeah. There had been a kind of a bad element that moved in there, and it just wasn't Disney quality any longer. So that's how we started. We got involved in the Imagineering team and said, well, how do we make a story that weaves together existing property? Because you can't just bulldoze everything into the lake, although a lot of us would have liked to have done that. We were starting with a lot of buildings and designs and theme and style, and we had to blend them all together. So after some months worth of blue sky and work, what we decided was, let's tell the story about a town, a little village that grew up over time in Florida, and that would give us the ability to categorize the existing venues and infrastructure into time frames, and then everything new that we would build, give us kind of a framework to tell that story. Right. And the story was really detailed. No guest will ever see it. It's not going to be on a mug or a T-shirt. Although I'd love to have it in a book, because a lot of people would like to see that. And that's the framework that we used, that literally not just guided us, but answered every single question that we had. Now, the big challenge, and I'll leave you with this thought, the big challenge at Disney Springs was one of the largest forms of investment that was being infused into the property was coming from third-party brands. Yeah. Even though Disney was sort of becoming a larger landlord, building buildings that would then be leased to other brands, as you know, you can't just have it be so branded Disney that it doesn't work for the other brands. Right. So as a design team, our largest challenge was figuring out how to make it feel specifically like a Disney environment. So when guests walked in, they felt, this is Disney, I feel it. Yeah. But you couldn't have Mickey and the Fab Five, dancing in the streets. Yeah. That's gonna mess up. Yeah, that's going to mess up Zara and Anthropology, and in fact, those brands all told us we don't want to be a part of this because it's the Disney brand. So it took quite a lot to design a space where those brands could live side by side in a storyscape that told the Disney brand story in a way that didn't interfere with the others. That was a huge challenge.
Yeah, I could see that. Maybe you can dispel some rumors I've heard. One was there was an
I don't know.
there was an Apple store that was going to come to Disney Springs. I think it was going to be in the Under Armour area, maybe. Anyway, but I heard that there was two things. One, Apple didn't like the hours. They didn't want to comply to Disney Springs hours, and I'm like, who cares, right? You're going to be selling iPhones every day in a very high traffic area. What do you care about the hours? But is there any truth to that? Will we ever see an Apple store at Disney? I feel like it's the perfect fit.
All of us did as well. I
Yeah.
sat in the meeting with Tim Cook and
Oh, okay.
Iger and all of the all of the leaders
Yeah.
of both. And at that initial meeting, it was very positive because Jobs or Cook or whoever, they all sat on each other's boards. So
Right.
it was one of those things where we got to make this happen.
Yeah.
And so there was smiles and handshakes and happiness at that leadership meeting. But then on the following meetings, when it was just down to the Apple real estate and design people, holy cow, that meeting was not the same tone.
Wow.
They even though we gave them, you were right in saying that it was the Under Armour store location.
Yeah.
We gave them probably one of the best crossroads there, where people are dumping off into that area.
Sure.
I never heard about the Disney hours. That I hadn't heard. One of the things that my team provided for Apple was all of the spaces all over the world that they occupied that were listed as historical districts. For example, there was a bank, I think it was in Germany, that they occupied, and they didn't touch the exterior. They didn't blow big holes in it to put the the glass. They just did a very simple Apple logo, and that was it. And that was kind of our design focus. Is we're not gonna do that. I don't think they like that. They liked where they were in Millennium Mall. Millennium Mall was giving them all kinds of breaks, and they had the big giant glass storefront, and I that's the only thing I can surmise by it, and it never happened.
Yeah.
Even though we tried multiple times.
Well, somebody needs to try again.
Yeah,
I just feel like and even if it was just a small version of an Apple store without the Genius Bar or anything, just sell products, like sell the accessories. How many people forget a cord, a battery charger? It would just be killer. Anyway, the other rumor I heard years ago was Osborne Lights was going to go to Disney Springs. They were going to decorate all the storefronts. And then I heard like some of the stores were like, no, we don't. The rumor was at night their signs would get turned off for a period of time while the lights were on. And then while the show was happening, then their sign. And I heard, I don't know, any truth into Osborne Lights coming to Disney Springs? I mean, it'd be a great place.
Well, I never heard the rumor.
Yeah. Okay.
And
good.
I'm in a unique position to answer that because I was the art director at Disney MGM Studios at the time for 8 years.
Oh wow! All right.
So very, very familiar with that show. Extremely familiar. And then I was the executive creative director leading Disney Springs. I never heard that was a possibility. It may have been a discussion, but what Disney Springs did, Walt Disney World paid. Funded separate from our project fund, the Imagineering team to design all new holiday overlay for that whole property. Right. So what my team did, we had a whole separate small team, a couple people that were designing Christmas decor for each of the neighborhoods. Because if you remember, all of the neighborhoods have a slightly different style, different architectural time frame and feel. So we created not only the music track that's still in use today, but literally all of the new overlay for the whole property, all the existing spaces as well as the new. And we worked with Lisa Barakanix, who is a rock star at Disney Holiday Services, and we collaborated with them. We did the design. They did all the sourcing and fabrication and installation. But I would have been a little bit upset if it was Osborne Lights going in, simply because my opinion, just since you brought it up, is that was yet one more brand
Yeah.
on top of an already very carefully balanced brand
Right.
ecosystem.
Sure.
And I'm concerned that it wouldn't, it would really erode the atmosphere and the feeling at Disney Springs, which we worked to really carefully balance there.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see that. I hated to see the lights go away. It was
Yeah,
heartbreaking.
it was a great show.
Heartbreaking. It was. It was.
Yeah.
And as a local, it was like, oh, I'll just go sit amongst, a couple million Christmas lights and have a cup of coffee.
Yeah. My family too. We did that every
Yeah.
year. Every
Yeah.
year it was a heritage thing we did.
Yeah. Let's talk about Disney Studio Parks. Was this the first time that Disney put Marvel in one of the theme parks as like a land area? Or
You're talking about Walt Disney Studios Paris?
yes, sorry. Yes.
Yeah. The Marvel project wasn't mine. I did
Okay.
Tower of Terror.
Oh, you
So
did
the
Tower
the
of Terror.
shirt that you were wearing. I did Tower of Terror, and they had a show there called Stitch
Right.
Live. That was translated into 5 languages at that time. Whew,
Wow.
that was tough. So the cool thing about Tower is it was a whole entire kind of neighborhood. It was like a little
Okay.
mini land
Right.
that we did there. But no, I didn't do the Marvel.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about your book. What is I don't have the title in front of me. Designers Creative Studio. That's your website.
That's my company, my brand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
go ahead.
oh, sorry, Tony. Go for it, man.
Yeah. So what was the title of the book?
The book is called Creating Memorable Worlds. It's a
Right.
journey into themed experience design.
Right.
So the idea behind it is to really serve as an essential guide for anyone who's interested in the industry that we all love
Yeah.
and that many of us work in. It is a cataloged journey of the entire process of how projects work, from before you start till after the project's over. I go through the entire industry as a foundation. What kinds of venues make up the industry?
Right.
Most people are surprised to know that it's theme parks and hotels, but it's also casinos and ships that kind of make up this larger industry.
Right.
Talk about all the people, the different disciplines and roles. What are the kind of roles that people play as a professional? Of course, we get creative and we get design, and
Right.
there's people that are project managers. We kind of get that, but so I go into much deeper as to what those disciplines and roles are, and then furthermore how they work together. This is, as we've said, is such a dynamic industry, and you have so many different groups or categories of disciplines to get these magical places built. How do they work together? How does that happen? And then something that I do that's really different than any other book that's out there is I really talk about going beyond the industry. Right, when you're in the industry, like myself, like thousands of others, and you get all those skills. You learn how to tell stories. You learn how to build physical environments that are immersive and tell stories. And how do you apply that to other segments of the global economy? So
Yeah.
I talk quite a lot about that. And then the last chapter in the book is really the story of you, the reader, and it takes you through a guide to identify what skills and passions and what's in your heart. How are you made? What's
Right.
the best way for you to get connected? Identify those skills, how to develop those skills, and really give you a way to chart your own path into the industry and what those jobs would be like. There's also a pretty hefty resource within the book as well. So websites, other books,
Oh,
organizations, all kinds of different stuff. So yeah, it's about 390 pages.
Wow.
It'll be shipping about the middle of next month.
Okay. What do you think? There's a lot of collaboration that's going on, right? You're talking about all the different disciplines. So, what's like a skill somebody needs to have to kind of be able to collaborate with cross-functionally different disciplines, artists, engineers, people that are doing rocks, painting, all that kind of stuff? What skills would that person need?
I would say chief among all the skills, and I in the book I call this a superpower,
Hmm.
is your ability to listen. Um, when you're sitting across from somebody and it feels like they're just waiting for you to stop talking so they can infuse what they have to say, ladies and gentlemen, that's not listening, right? Listening deeply and understanding your colleagues, no matter what their role is, or where they're from. Some individuals are extremely technical. They have to have a degree. They need
Hmm.
licenses, right? They
Yeah.
work according to codes, and then others are non-technical, still highly skilled, but they don't require the same kind of degree necessarily.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're coming up with something from nothing. How do those individuals work together? Well, the most important way is that they listen and that they communicate. As an art director, as a creative director, one of the things I learned early in my career was the ability that I learned to communicate with all of these different roles and disciplines is the ability to which I can deliver a high quality final project.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean I have to be a lighting designer, for example, but I have to know how to communicate to a lighting designer to really communicate my vision, and what I think this scene should really look like and feel like.
Right.
Um, so I think that is the thing that I would say is number one. Number two, which is a part of listening, is what we all know as soft skills,
Hmm.
right? Everybody comes out of university and they've got hard skills. I know how to use this software. I know how to, do this, and I can do that. And that's what we put on our resume. But the skills that really get you hired and keep you hired, because teams love to work with you, those are all soft skills: emotional intelligence, the ability to negotiate and compromise, right? If you're digging your heels in and this has got to be blue,
Right.
you're creating a challenge for yourself. And when teams don't want to work with you, it's very difficult to find work in the industry. So
Yeah.
that's what I would encourage everybody is, and I always do with students, and I do very heavily in my book, is to lean into and understand what those soft skills are, and find ways to develop them and represent yourself in that way,
Yeah.
in your resume, your portfolio, your website, etc.
Yeah. Uh, in your book, you talk about world building. What kind of research needs to go into, world building? Like, I'm sure Walt didn't wake up one day, oh, I'm just going to build this giant amusement park. I'm sure there was a lot of thinking and research that went into, doing it. We all hear the story of him sitting on a park bench and, not being able to play with his daughters. But I'm sure that after that epiphany, there was some research and thought that went to it. So, what kind of research has to be done, Theron, to get that done?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great question. I think what's really great about those stories of Walt is that, and the early Imagineers all
Yeah.
came from his film studio, is that the art of filmmaking is really core to themed entertainment design or themed experience design. It's integral, and you don't just go make a film because you like the film and then you put it out there. You understand that the story that you're telling resonates with the audience that you want to enjoy what you're
Hmm.
creating. A film is a medium that, of course, is around for forever,
Yeah.
right? Same with the
Right.
book, same with the video game, but those or a theatrical presentation. But a theme park is a multi-billion-dollar physical asset that
Hmm.
exists for decades and decades and decades. It's not a film that it didn't do good. We lost 20 million bucks. Sorry, put it on the shelf, and we're going to go make another one.
Right.
That's not what happens if you build a land that doesn't work, or you build attractions that don't work. That's hundreds of millions of dollars kind of wasted, right? So the only way that a themed environment works is if that venue, that story, makes an emotional connection with the people who visit it. And
Right.
that emotional connection with that brand, with that story, is what drives them to come back and experience it again and again. And that's a critical point. That's different than games, different than books, different than theater, film, streaming. It's different than any other entertainment format. That is a design requirement for designers like myself
Yeah.
is it doesn't just have to last. It doesn't just have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be cool and work with the brand or represent the IP well. It has to make an emotional connection.
Right.
Therefore, you have to know the audience that you're telling those stories to, and those stories have to be relevant to that audience. So the point that you were making is that's what the research is.
Yeah.
We're telling stories in 3 dimensions, but if we're telling Western stories, for example, in an Eastern place, it may not resonate, right?
Yeah, sure.
Even in Western Europe, some of those stories don't resonate. So
Yeah.
that's a really critical component.
Yeah. I had a thought and it just ran out of my head, but I'll get back to. Oh, so the characters that inhabit these worlds, does their story need to be based there as well? Do they need to be tied to the overall story of the attraction or the land or the place they are?
Yes, and I'll say that with an asterisk at the
Okay.
end. With regard to Disney, Disney's brand has put the Fab Five characters
Mhm.
in a position where they can kind of supersede lands, right, and venues and stories,
Right.
and I really believe that that's because they were those characters, as many of the Disney characters, were introduced in a film environment.
Mhm.
And in a sense, we grew up seeing those characters play multiple roles in multiple scenarios and multiple story types. So I think that's why you see Mickey, Minnie, Pluto, Donald, etc., and they transition into other venues and themes well. Other characters don't really do that. So in other words, it would feel really weird if Sleeping Beauty or Snow White, for example, showed up in Animal Kingdom, right?
Yeah.
That's a land within their story realms that doesn't exist.
Right.
Same with Tomorrowland.
Yeah.
So Fantasyland is that world that embodies all those stories about fantasy, which include many, many characters. Tomorrowland's the same way. Adventureland's the same way, right? Liberty Square, etc. And it's the same with every park that you go to. Now, when you get into a property like Epcot, that's when, because it wasn't actually built the way Walt intended,
Sure.
it's always been this story that is constantly evolving. And how does the Disney company, invent new stories, and how do we, tell stories there within the World Showcase? Those countries are kind of like characters in themselves that occupy that space. So that's how I would say about that. Now, in the outside world, out of Disney and out of the legacy brands in general, you want to always put characters that feel like they live in the particular venue that you've made, because it makes the venue come alive in a way that no other element can, because it's a living, breathing human, right? Or character, animatronic, that kind of thing. It just becomes a really important design element for that space.
Yeah. Do you think that a well-developed world can carry a weak story, or does the story have to be strong enough to carry the world you're building?
The interesting thing about worlds is that there needs to be what I would call an overarching narrative that ties directly to the brand. So if we were going out and we were working with a venture group or a government or something, and we were looking at concepting a brand new park, a whole world, that very overarching narrative would have to align with that company's brand, just like Disney's brand, right? It's happily ever after. It's where dreams comes true. It's about families, and it's Bambi's mother was shot by the hunters, but at the end of the day, he became the prince of the forest. So that shows us that we can go through emotions, but they're just not extreme, right? Nobody's chasing you with a chainsaw in the Disney brand.
Right.
So that overarching brand has to be a brand story, brand narrative has to be established first. The reason I say that is under that umbrella, now you can create all kinds of individual stories that occur at the land level, or that occur at the attraction level or the show level,
Okay.
all the way down to the individual kiosk level, where they are just other chapters, other explorations into this world. Think about our own world. You've got different countries, you've got different geographic locations, and you could tell many, many, many hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of stories about our world. And that's the way we think when we build a fantasy world, is in the same layers. And the reason that's important, Tony, is because those worlds are being built for human beings.
Yeah.
And human beings have been trained to look at worlds in that way. And anything kind of less than that, the perception is it's not real. It doesn't suspend my disbelief. My perception is potentially that that's kind of cheap. It's kind of artificial. And that's why you see a lot of brands that are seeking to do this, they fail because they don't think of it in that same level of detail.
Right. The question popped in my head. So you talked about like the research, right? You do the research, you know your audience to tell that story. I'll just pick any Disney attraction, right? It has a story. But how do you know you were successful? Like, people keep going back, obviously, year after year. I did. But how does Disney measure that? Oh, this is successful. Is it, the amount of people that ride it? Is it exit surveys? Is it, what's the research on the back end of, all of that?
It's a really good question.
I'm sure Disney is a data-driven company. I'm sure there's a lot of data everywhere.
Yeah. And that's the thing. A lot of, I think, students who are coming into this industry maybe they know, but in their way back recesses, they don't think about it in the foreground, is that this is a commercial venture, right? Disney's not an NGO. It's not an art project. They're there to make money. There's a whole lot of art involved, and they do a lot with NGOs, and they put a lot back into the community, into the world. But to your point, it's a business the size of a Disney has to deeply, deeply understand its guests, and that kind of goes without saying. But what's a real challenge is that when it comes to leisure and entertainment, the human being is a very fickle animal, and likes and tastes and desires and earnings and there's so many things that change year over year, that companies like Disney, those legacy brands that are really dependent on locals, regional visits and international visits, they have to adapt and flow and move with those cadences. So they study that, not only large trends in industries, not only in marketplaces. They do a whole lot of what they call forecasting. They'll look at all kinds of various models, and they'll forecast what a particular quarter is going to be like, what a season might be like. And then, as you said, they do an enormous amount of surveying. And that's verbatim. That's face-to-face talking with guests. And in parks, right? And you just got off this new ride. What do you think? As well as doing lots of in-market surveys. So they'll go to New York and do a survey. They'll go to Los Angeles and do a survey, big tier 1 cities and population groups.
Yeah. It's interesting. Every time you leave a park now, you get, a survey the next day from Disney. Hey, we noticed that you were in the Magic Kingdom yesterday. Tell us about your... And I always love the last question is, can we add this information to all of the other data we've collected about you? And I'm like, what if I say no? Are there two Casanova profiles then? Is there one that said yes and one that said no? Anyway.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Thankfully, that was not my job while I was at Disney. I just observed it taking place.
And then I'm thinking, can I get a copy of this data just to look at it for my own curiosity of like, what was I thinking?
That's a really good question. I can say, at least the time that I was there, the data that is collected from guests, which includes what Disney reaches out to acquire, but it also includes the information that Disney guests send, right?
Sure.
Disney guests are very possessive of
Hmm.
the Disney product, and they very much feel like it's their product, their
Right.
venue. So they
Yeah.
very free to write letters and everything. So
Sure.
all of your listeners, any Disney guests that
Yeah.
hears what I'm about to say will reinforce probably what they've heard. But that information is used
Oh
by
yeah.
Imagineering, by
Hmm.
entertainment, by operations
Yeah.
to not just improve, but to inform design of new product. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd agree. What are some exercises or techniques that you talk about, like in your book, that for storytellers that may be struggling with a story or world building, or you know, I mean, nowadays there's AI, right? You can go to ChatGPT and say, "Hey, tell me a story about X, Y, Z." At least that get your blank page filled with something that you can then build on. But what would be
Right.
some techniques and exercises that you would say there are?
Well, I go quite deep into that in chapter 8, where I
Okay.
talk about the practice that I've developed called narrative experience design. And that's basically tells readers that the story itself doesn't just come to your head as in 1786, right? You could do that, but you
Yeah.
should probably go write novels, right? That
Mhm.
or invent a game or a TV show or something like that. Because in those expressions of entertainment, you can be very inventive. When you're actually creating a dimensional physical space whose design requirements is to make an emotional connection, as I said, with the people who visit there.
Right.
And those people have to come back over and over and over so that it's successful commercially. And that actual physical dimensional venue represents a brand. Well, we have to build stories with a different kind of mindset. And my approach is the very first thing that I need is a deep understanding of the brand, the company's brand.
Hmm.
What are the things that they stand for? How is their company formed? What's core to their brand?
Right.
How do they train their employees, based on the heart and soul of their brand? That's the first thing. Second thing, I have to understand their audience. Who are their customers? Who visit them now?
Hmm.
If the project that we're on is expanding and maybe the client wants to grow to a new audience or something, understanding the full spectrum of the
Hmm.
audience that currently visits the venue or that the client wants to grow to,
Yeah.
very, very important. And the last thing is understanding the business objectives. What does the company want to do with this? Do they want to make money simply? Do they want to penetrate a particular market more? Do they want to grow population? So those three elements, brand, audience, and business goals,
Okay.
I then take that and create a story that completely envelops those three things. That way, the story itself is the vehicle that delivers on all of that content that's really important to the client.
Yeah.
Because if I just come in with telling a really interesting story that I invented, and the client at the particular time is like, "Wow, that's kind of cool. Let's do this," and you're in the middle of design or God forbid construction,
Hmm.
and the client, maybe leadership changes in the client and they don't like the story, then you're stuck. Where if the story actually delivers on the business objectives, it delivers on the growing the brand equity and strengthening the brand and acquiring the audience members, then the story is intrinsic to delivering the project. So that's how I do it. I think that's a designer's approach because
Yeah.
it solves problems, it drives business, it uplifts brands, and that's in my opinion the way stories should be used in business.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you know, somebody that would buy your book is probably interested in this field. So if they wanted to, work for Disney, Universal, or, whoever it is, what would you tell somebody that's trying to, crack into this? I think it's a tough area. It's, you know, it-
Yes.
people come, people go, projects change, expansion, reduction in
Yeah.
workforce. It's tough. So what would be some tips that you would tell a young lad graduating from college?
Definitely. I'm really blessed to be in a position where not as much as I would like, but I get to speak to students
Yeah.
and really kind of help and inform them and share my experience and hopefully help them. And actually, this entire month, my podcast I was with Melody Matheny, and
Mhm.
it was focusing on my chapter 9, the last chapter, and it was the whole all my social posting and everything was really based on the story of you. And so this is a perfect question. What I typically advise new professionals or the next generation
Right.
within this industry of experience design is I always recommend not to chase a brand. Don't just chase Imagineering or Disney. Don't just chase Universal Creative because it's a brand, it's a logo. I actually prefer a small to medium sized company
Yeah.
within the field that of what you're graduating in or what you're studying. And I would go to a company that is again small to medium size, and there are many companies. The massive benefit to those new professionals is that that company is going to require more from you in a sense. So if you're hired as a graphic designer, for example, but
Hmm.
you are passionate in illustration and photography, and maybe you like several different things, well, that company is going to lean on you to do a lot more. You'll grow faster, and then
Hmm.
you'll work across a lot more venues than just Disney,
Right.
right? You might have a Disney, you might have a Universal, you might be in SeaWorld, you might be in China, you might be in the UK, you could be in Western Europe, the Middle East, all throughout Southeast Asia. So there's a massive benefit of being in small to medium size companies because you get what I would say is a much broader experience than you would going to work for a legacy brand.
Yeah.
That's not to deter anybody.
Sure.
If you put in your resume and you get hired, great. Enjoy it, learn all that you can. But
Yeah.
for most people, that's what I recommend.
Yeah. It was interesting. I had a conversation with Bob Weiss about his book, and one of the things when I asked that question was he was saying that in your portfolio, just don't have that final great image of whatever you built. Show us how you got to that great image. What was your thinking? Show us all the different iterations that got you to this, so that somebody looking at it can go, okay, he's got a thought process. It just didn't magically appear via AI or something. So I thought that
Right.
was very good information.
Yeah,
Um,
I align with that completely, and I give students that same advice: is
yeah.
to don't just show. I did this. I won't mention the university.
Mm.
It was for a master's thesis, right? It was
Mm.
graduating class, and we did it was a very rapid portfolio review of, I don't know, 10 students. It was lightning round,
Right. Yeah.
and I don't know. Half of the students that I reviewed their portfolios had the exact same photograph from the exact same, I don't know, play or whatever they worked on. And I found myself as the interviewer saying, well, what did you do here?
Yeah.
And so that's always my
Yeah.
encouragement is no matter what you do, whether you're in the technical field or the non-technical field, if you're
Mhm.
going to put something in your portfolio, at least for the first couple of entries, show your process.
Yeah.
How do you think of things? How do you work together? And when you present it, talk about how you collaborated with the other disciplines and how you brought your expertise to get to the
Yeah.
final product that you're showcasing.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's way more important than a slick, glossy,
Right.
great picture.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So, do you have any upcoming projects or book expansions? A version 2 coming? What's in your pipeline
Wow,
that
man, I
that you
just want to
can
get my book
or willing to
out.
share?
Well, I've been really focused on the book.
Yeah.
Some of your readers, or some of your viewers,
Yeah.
listeners, may remember I launched it at IAPA in
Yeah.
November, and really super exciting. So I've been working on pre-orders all the way through till now.
Yeah.
I just reviewed with my publisher The printer sent samples of cover, the cover being printed and internal pages. So it's like, it's getting so close.
Right.
So that's coming. It's going to roll out the door. I'll have book tours and signing parties and all that stuff coming up. In the pipeline, I have quite a lot of things that I'm doing. And I'm sure you get this from everybody, but it's all under NDA. I can't really share anything. But I can say that one of the things that I'm working on right now that I'm probably more excited on than I have been in my career in a very, very long time. Cool. It is literally kind of a new form of entertainment. I would say a sea change in this industry, and that's got me getting up early. I'm pretty excited about that.
Very cool. Very cool. We'll have to wait until that launches, and then you'll have to come back and talk about
it. Definitely.
So tell everybody where they can find you, find the book, if they want to contact you, ask you a question like, hey, I'm trying to do this, advice.
Absolutely. Well, there's a bunch of ways, right? So probably the way that most people connect with me is on LinkedIn. I have a personal LinkedIn profile, so people can just look me up by my name. My company, the Designers Creative Studio, has a corporate page there where kind of go through the different projects and things that we've done, different types of support and stuff that have happened. I do Instagram as well, but people can't really find me there. You can look it up. It's probably the next most active would be my YouTube channel. Okay. I created a whole lot of videos during COVID that were intended to be instructional and help people with the industry. I get a lot of visitors through there, and I put all my podcasts on that as well. Yeah. The other way is my website, designerscreativestudio.com. There's a lot of information on there. I have an entire media archive of podcasts and interviews and news stories and a bunch of stuff if people is interested. A lot of information on narrative experience design, a bit more explanation on that. Plus, I also have a business of coaching where I do coach quite a lot of professionals who are in the industry now who are looking to pivot and turn, and how should I think about these skills? And I just spend a lot of time helping people with that, as well as students and new professionals as well. Cool. The book has its own website, so creatingmemorableworlds.com. And if anybody is interested in my podcast, it's called The League of Extraordinary Storytellers. Just released episode 5 this month. Toward the end of this month, I'm working on episode 6. They're all members of the industry who are masters at their own game, and they've all of my whole first season are all just contributors to the book. I've had 14 of them, so it'll be a really great full season.
Yeah. All right. Awesome.
So I have a website for that as well.
Yeah, we'll link up to all of that. I can't thank you enough for coming on. I appreciate your time. I know you have your other book. How did Disney do that as well? We should mention that with James.
Yes.
We had you both on for that. So he may look familiar.
Thanks for reminding me. Yes, I'm so focused on my book. Apologies, James. That was a really fun collaboration as well. People will really love that.
Yeah. And I think he's working on a second volume of that as well. So that's very cool.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
I should say I just launched a new series that I'll be dropping on LinkedIn. It's called The Anatomy of an Experience, and that, frankly, is another book that I'm working on in the some distance future. But as I develop that, I've done quite a lot of research for my existing book, and I'm spinning off some of that, and I'm just going to be dropping that as a series on LinkedIn, and then I'll end up assembling all of that into a volume at some point in the future.
Wow. All right. You're busy.
Yeah.
You're busy.
Yeah, I don't like being bored, so
I can imagine. Excellent. As I said, thank you for coming on. I appreciate your time and the great information. We could probably talk about this stuff all day long, but we all have other things to do. But really, thank you. We'll link up to everything and make sure that everybody gets to see all that. But
fantastic.
All right. Thanks,
My
Theron.
pleasure, Tony. Thanks for having me.
The Disney Parks podcast is not affiliated with the Walt Disney Company. All Disney parks, attractions, lands, shows, event names, etc. are registered trademarks of the Walt Disney Company.